Welcome. Thank you all for being here. So this is the GVSU Quest, our series that was designed to showcase the expertise that we have around GVSU on timely issues. And I would like to introduce the topic of today by reading the first few lines of the poem Hieroglyphic Staircase by Drew Dollinger. And it starts this way. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I can't sleep. My great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in my dreams, what have you done? What have you done when the planet was pummeled? What have you done when the earth was unraveling? Surely you have done something. What did you do when you knew? So, very grateful to everybody around the panel here who hopefully can tell us what we can do.
Thank you so much, Provost Millie. This is Christine Renner from the Faculty Teaching and Learning Center, and it is my pleasure and delight to help facilitate this panel discussion on climate resilience. So I have a few things to say to set the stage, and then I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we have a few questions prepared, and hopefully we will have a lively discussion and entertain your questions as well. So let me just set the stage with a little bit of terminology. Climate change, climate justice, equality, sustainability, resilience. All of these concepts are very complex and intertwined, and they require an expertise from a wide range of disciplines. To help us understand this wider collaborative conversation that is taking place at Grand Valley among the panelists here and across the world, we can turn, for example, to some outside resources, such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, wherein our future water, food, energy, and economic security interact with the dwindling natural resource base that is currently being impacted by climate and increasing human demand. We can also turn to the recommendations from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that details the state of what we know about the climate change impacts, the risks, mitigation, and adaptation. We can also take a deeper dive into the United States Climate Resilience Toolkit, which is hosted by the United States Global Change Research Program. And the picture that emerges from all of these resources and the conversation that is taking place is that there is a clear imperative to act, and act along a sustainable and resilient path moving into the future. What I particularly appreciate about the term resilience, which is the ability of a system to rebound upon disturbance, is the term resilience reminds us that climate change is and will continue to be nonlinear, chaotic, unpredictable. But resilience is also a hopeful term in that it helps us prepare for a range of possibilities and circumstances. I'm grateful to be joined on stage today with these distinguished panelists to explore these topics and the contributions that are being made by Grand Valley State University faculty, staff, and students. So next, if I could ask each panelist to introduce themselves and tell us what your current role is at Grand Valley. And if you could also explain a little bit about your academic and individual interests in Grand Valley's climate change, climate resilience, and sustainability efforts. And we can just go down the line, if you will.
Hello, Rence Meredith, Assistant Vice President for Facility Services here in Allendale. I'm responsible for the utility budget at the university. So obviously of great interest would be the efficiencies that we have on the campus, the opportunities that we have for energy conservation measures, and really just meeting our sustainability and our energy efficiency goals and our carbon neutrality goals. So I work quite extensively in those areas. I work with Yumi quite a bit on the sustainability side. We have recycling in our path that we've always done a great job with, and so there's lots of different components, and we've got lots of great partners here on campus.
Bob Hollister. I'm in the biology department. I've taught environmental science for almost 20 years, or actually more than 20 years. I do research in the Arctic, looking at the impacts of climate change on vegetation in particular, but ecosystems in general, and we're funded as part of the Arctic Observatory Network, so the same conference as all the sea ice people and the Greenland melting and all that stuff. So I've been involved with that for 20 plus years, almost 30 years now. But most of my kind of climate change experience probably is more in the classroom, that I've been studying this for a long time.
Hello, my name is Becky Williams. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Studies. I teach in the environmental sustainability program. We do a lot of work in that program on the people side of climate change. My research is largely focused in Central America and how climate change is leading to changes in rural livelihoods and the push to migrate to the United States. So that's pretty much what I do.
Good afternoon. My name is Bopi Bidanga. I am a professor of water resources. I teach and do research on water in the Great Lakes, and how water cycles in the Earth system.
Hi everyone, it's so nice to be here with you all. I'm Yumi Jakovic. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability Practices. I have the privilege of working with colleagues across all the campuses to kind of try and capture all of the good work that's being done in terms of sustainability and climate, both for reporting purposes, but also to try and engage our students and to help them kind of view the campus as a lab, as a place to kind of explore some of the technologies and the research that are happening here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, everyone. So I'll start with my first question. And my first question is, what can we learn from nature's resilience? Or more specifically, the ways in which natural systems exhibit diversity and functional resilience. And we can start with you, Bobi.
I think it's a good idea to ask nature, the master teacher, what can we learn from you? Let me quickly redefine resilience with some examples before we get going, asking what can nature teach us? Resilience is the capacity of a system to bounce back close to the original state following a disturbance. For example, how will a lake recover after a pollution event? How will a forest recover after a serious bout of drought? How will a city like Acapulco recover after a major hurricane? How will the Earth system recover after an unexpected surge of warmth? So that is basically the capacity of a system to come back to where it was before, resilience. And as you can see, anyone having experienced any adversity in personal life and so on, resilience is very important to be able to recover. So let me go back to nature. What are the lessons that this master teacher can teach us? Of course, nature has been dealing with adversities for hundreds of millions of years, and there are lessons we can learn from it. One of the lessons is even a tiny lake or a forest is an assembly of interconnected, interworking species of thousands of varieties. And I may be really minimizing it. Millions may be the right thing, especially in terms of numbers. And not only is diversity important because it's beautiful, but because it confirms an ecosystem, what is called functional richness, or even more importantly, functional redundancy. Now, how many of us would not love to have a good plumber in our household? Ecosystems have tens to hundreds, maybe thousands of plumbers within each of them. So let's say disease strikes down one species, many can step into the plate and help the ecosystem bounce back. So, from campus, from households to campuses, to city-states, to nations, and the entire planet, we have to think of lessons we can learn from nature and adapt it, because we're part of nature. Regardless of how disconnected we may feel, we all depend on nature's resources. So that there are many lessons we can learn, and one thing I can think of as an important lesson would be to bring in a culture in our lessons and in our practice on campuses, or culture of sustainable resiliency. If we begin that now, we're already making some progress, I think we'll be way ahead of the curve in facing the challenges of the future. Thank you.
I'll just add that in a lot of ways, things probably won't return to before. As a studying paleoclimates, paleoecology, paleoplants, the communities we have today are different from the communities where in Michigan this was, a lot of ice. When I was in college, before they started talking climate change, they were still talking about have the trees rebounded from the last glaciation. And so it's a continual changing. So nature will be just fine. The problem is people. So we really, really like stability. And if we've got changing environment that's unstable, that's costly, that's disruptive, corn will still be able to be grown. One of the fun graphs that I show in one of my classes is, showing where the corn belt is. One of the projections is the corn belt moving to Lake Superior. Well, that's kind of a problem because there's a lake there, but people like north of Lake Superior, they're good at cutting down trees. They're not very good at growing corn, whereas you go to Iowa for corn, so huge economic disruption. So in a lot of ways, the resilience is not necessarily nature resilience, because nature will be just fine over the long haul. It's people's resilience. What we do, how much of an economic impact, social impact, emotional impact, those are the ones that are the most dire in the near future.
Wonderful. Any of the other panelists want to comment on? It's very helpful perspectives. Thank you. My next question, how is the subject of climate resilience being integrated into student experiences in the classroom and out of the classroom? And actually, Bob, would you like to start us off?
Yep. Grand Valley does a lot of courses. I was looking up earlier today just all the programs and so forth. But there's obviously the environmental studies is, a major/minor. Natural resource and environmental management's another major. Geography has an emphasis in climate change mitigation, adaptation, resilience planning. Biology does a bunch of ecology and evolution. Geology and chemistry are adding courses all the time. There's talk of making a new environmental science major. There's talk of making a climate change major. So there's a lot of course offerings. I've been teaching environmental science since I've been here. It's popular, gen ed course that hundreds of people take every year. There's lots of course offerings, lots of groups that are interested. The Climate Change Education Solutions Network, which Elena's here, that's been a good glue to bring together a lot of, I think we've all been associated with that group. If nothing else, go to that webpage, which is, Grand Valley /CCES for Climate Change Education Solutions. And it just lists all the faculty that are kind of involved on campus. There's a lot of student groups. I'll let others speak to that. There's a lot of research opportunities. I do research in the Arctic. I usually take 5 students every year. But honestly, anyone doing any kind of ecological research now has some touching on climate change. So anyone at AWRI is somehow associated. Anyone in really in a lot of fields would have climate change, whether they acknowledge it or not. If you're doing planning for cities and so forth, you're going to have some climate change aspects to it. So there's a lot. The most good thing, fun thing is that it's, there's groups like this. And so there's people that are kind of getting together, talking about it in a more interdisciplinary way, much more so than in the past.
Thanks, Bob. And I can speak a little bit just to the experiences that are happening outside of the classroom. So we're really trying to create a variety of opportunities for students to engage in this in ways that complement what they're learning inside of the classroom. And so we've been really thrilled to be able to provide some kind of hands-on experiences for students, but also to provide the space for them to grow and learn from other like-minded students, to be able to have kind of that community amongst them. And so there's this great book called Drawdown, and it kind of lists the different topics that you could cover to work toward climate change and climate resiliency. And number 8 on that list is actually solar energy. And so we were so thrilled when we were able to work with Consumers Energy to bring a solar garden to campus. And along with that, they provided some funding for educational opportunities. And so that's where we were really excited to kind of dive deep in how we can bring that education to K through 12, to our first responders, of course, to our own students. And similarly, number 11 on that list as a way to help fight climate change is regenerative agriculture. And so sometimes we don't always think of farming and climate change to be so deeply connected, but there actually are quite a lot of close connections between them. And so that's what we're trying to do at Grand Valley Sustainable Agriculture Project. That's our farm that's on the south side of campus. But there we're really trying to allow students to kind of engage in regenerative agriculture practices, but also to kind of learn how their major fits into the bigger picture there. And then as Bob mentioned, all the registered student organizations, there's more and more that are sustainability and climate related each year. I think that really provides a nice space for students to kind of work together to tackle some of these issues.
I can add some to what Bob started introducing. We all easily can agree change is the only certainty going forward. And in our classrooms and in our research labs, that should be a central theme. And as one studying water, I can clearly see in a warming planet, the atmosphere is going to hold more water. And the water cycle is going to go on, on steroids. And we're already seeing, intense droughts and floods happening, and record warm spells. So, it will no longer be for example, our grandfather's agriculture, what they were able to predictably form. So food, energy, infrastructure, all of these are going to be under stress in a future world. So courses that bring some of these things together would be, I think, very rewarding for our students as they go forward into the next stage that's inevitable. And yes, nature can teach us a lot, but we're in the driving seat now. So we can't shirk responsibility. We have to come up with solutions and not just say, the younger generations will solve these problems for us. No, we have to think, like the provost said, it is, there is this conceptual idea in evolutionary history of the planet that the average species has a lifetime of 2 million years or so. Assuming we've been around for 200,000 years or so, the human race has a long way to go if we keep a habitable planet. That means literally billions and trillions of us will follow us. What do we owe them? They haven't done anything for us. Don't we owe them? Don't we owe them a habitable world? So these are big, grand challenges that we're up against. But we can start small in our classrooms and in our research labs.
Great. Thank you for that hopeful addition. Yes. So again, on the topic of student engagement in climate resilience, how do Grand Valley State University students gain research experience and contribute to the scholarship in climate resilience? Becky?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So for me, one of the things that was, I've been at Grand Valley now this is my second year here, and one of the things that really excited me about coming here were the vast opportunities for undergraduates, especially to participate in research. So I was fortunate to participate as a mentor in the S-Cubed program, which from the Office of Undergraduate Research. So I actually had my own student over the summer, and she was able to take the research project she developed in our research methods class and actually do her project, which was a really awesome experience because she was very tied to that project and was able to go into the community and actually conduct her own research. So we teach research methods to students, of course, in our coursework, but we also look for opportunities for students to engage with that in the community, in research labs, and in other spaces. So my student, for example, was looking at the potential for dairy farmers in Western Michigan to move towards more sustainable practices, and really looking at the attitudes of farmers, the discourse around it, the politicization of climate change, and how all of that affects what it is that they decide not to do, or to do, I should say. And when I was at the students' showcase, just seeing all of the research in chemistry and biology in the Water Institute and all of these different spaces that students are able to engage in. And another thing I really enjoy about the Brooks College of Interdisciplinary Studies is that in our ENS program, we really try to get students into the community. So we have an amazing coordinator for internships and practicums, Crystal Scott Tunstall, who does a great job of linking students with community organizations, getting them involved in research opportunities, and getting their hands actually into some of these really challenging problems and how we can address them. So I think that the centering student education here at Grand Valley is one of the ways that we really are engaging this next generation and how they can solve these intractable problems.
Thank you. Let me ask a follow-up question, and then this is something I know that we've talked about in the past, and that is, as we are thinking about empowering students as climate change actors, how do we help students manage climate anxiety?
Yes, so climate anxiety is really prominent in our students. And for myself too, I think there's a lot of people who are really struggling with our footprints and how do we reconcile that, especially in the global north where our footprints are so large in comparison to other places. And I know that my students really grapple with this. One of the things I love about them is that they are just raring to make a difference. Like, they want to make change. And they want to know, like, how do we do that, right? Just like you all when we started, they want the specific, like, give me my list that I can check off of all the things that I can do to solve this problem, that are within my ability to do so. But along with that, there's so much stress over this seemingly massive problem that really has been passed down to this generation. And so in my courses and in courses of some of my colleagues, we really examine what drives climate anxiety. How to look at your mental health while you're also trying to solve these really big, challenging, sometimes disheartening problems. And so one of the things that we do in my classroom is they have a sphere of influence project where they really focus in on their own lives, where they can make tangible differences in their own lives and in their own communities, but while also recognizing that a lot of the challenges from climate change are coming from very high policy levels, corporate levels, big agriculture, and so on and so forth. So trying to help them find the balance between what do you actually have control over right now, what can you do in your career in the future, and then how can you manage that as you're going through classes and learning. So I think this is a really important thing to bring into the classroom so that students do have that sense of hope. So I think we can all of us that are in the classroom, sometimes it's really hard to teach about climate change, and the students can get really disheartened, when they hear the science and they see the changes and they hear how the snow is changing in Michigan and the temperature and all of that. And so helping them to understand how to cope with those challenges while actively pursuing a more resilient future, I think is something that I know that we take on as a responsibility in our department for sure.
I'd just add, I try to do as many hopeful things as possible. The Montreal protocols, the kind of classic example. The ozone layers, it's not back yet, but it's getting better. Projections are it'll come back. the total fertility rate, TFR, we talk about number of babies born. There's realistic projections that within our lifetime, or within the kids in our classes' lifetime, world population will start to decrease. Michigan's population is decreasing. A lot of people, politicians, talk about that as a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. But it'll be a bad thing because we got to pay for old people instead of young people. But you know, that's a whole different political thing. But there's lots of, if you look at world hunger, it's gone down. You go down the list, everything is better with two exceptions, climate change and biodiversity. But we'll pretend that those are, you know, keep the success stories up and down the board. There's lots of success stories. And even with climate change, you know, the renewables are growing super fast. Solar powers beat every projection that's ever been made. So we're getting there. We're not there yet.
I would agree with that idea that we have to tell the good stories too, the ones that are working. Like the lake on which I work, Muskegon Lake, has improved over the last couple of decades in its water quality and fish quality and so on. We can tell those good stories. Change is possible, but we also need to be clear not to gloss over the major, you know, impending, you know, catastrophes that could fall, a careless, you know, a business as usual scenario. That is also very important. And I mean, you know, the truth has to come out in our classrooms as well. But yes, the really positive thing, really hopeful thing is all the solutions, even what seemed gargantuan, so big, the solutions are there, the methods are there, technological solutions are there, even the money is there. You know, the money spent in a single war that's going on now can easily solve the entire global climate issue. And also bring some parity to the global south to mitigate the damages that they will have to suffer. It's true, there's some things that are, you know, even technology controversy, like the loss of some of our, you know, glaciers. Those are ongoing things, and we don't, and the oceans themselves are warming up, the biggest thermostat on the planet, okay? So no amount of alternative energy and things like that are going to reverse some of those things. So some change, I would say, even as far as another degree of Celsius increase and its attendant consequences on energy, food, infrastructure, those things are going to follow. But we can at least, we have the resources, even the technology, and the money to solve these problems. Only thing lacking is the will and the policy changes, societal level changes that need to be put into place.
Just following up on that, I think that that's just such an important point. Is that we know what needs to be done, right? You know, it's. I listened to when the IPCC came out with their most recent report. I listened to their presentation on it, and you know, they were very clear. Like, we know exactly what needs to be done, right? You know, the science, you know, is there. So you know, why are we not, you know, doing all the things that need to be done? And one of the things I think that we work hard with the students is creating resilient students too, who then, you know, we're preparing them a lot of times for jobs that don't exist yet, right? We don't have any idea what some of these future careers for them are going to be, especially around climate change, climate resilience, climate mitigation, and then also, of course, the impacts of climate change and what kinds of jobs those are going to create, right? So developing students who you know, can think through complex problems, who can come at it from an interdisciplinary lens. And so we spend a lot of time talking about the economic and the social, the cultural, you know, the rights-based approaches and so on, rather than just the hard science behind, you know, what's causing climate change. It's looking at all these different systems interact with one another, and what is going to be the consequences, you know, that go through those different systems, and how are students going to be prepared for a future where they're going to be handling these things. And I also constantly on my students about getting involved in politics, getting involved in voting, getting involved in, you know, everything they possibly can, so that they do feel more empowered, right? You know, and so that's I think that idea, like, we do know what needs to be done. We may not know exactly what the future is going to look like, but we need to create students that are prepared for that uncertainty and are confident in their ability to solve and work with others to solve these challenging problems.
Yumi, did you have something to add to that? Okay. Thank you. So I want to come back to the spheres of influence concept with my next question. And just as a reminder, I'm sure all of you are aware that Grand Valley State University has long focused on its own practices, whether around energy, food, water, land uses, etc. And so I'm interested if you could share, Rents, some examples of campus efforts to become even more climate resilient.
Thanks, Christine. So how much time do I have? Okay, fair enough. The first thing I would say, and I think that we all need to keep in perspective, one thing that we probably don't do enough is tell our story, right? And tell it very well and consistently. And the one thing that I would say is that everything that we do at Grand Valley is self-prescribed, right? We're doing all these things because we know that they're the right thing to do from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, from a governance perspective. And so we do these things because we have great people that support these activities and these things that we do to make ourselves more efficient, right, or to be more resilient in what we do. And so I think that's first and foremost. Secondly, the amount of space that we've added over the course of the last 20 years is about 64%. Okay, so 20 years ago we were 64% smaller in square footage than we are today. Yet that being said, we've saved about 30% in electrical consumption and cost, 35% in natural gas consumption and cost, 35% in steam consumption and cost and production. And so all of those things are real numbers based on the amount of square footage that we have. So I think we need to keep that in perspective, and it takes a lot of great people to do all of those things. The one time, if you ever see Terry Paul, right? Terry Paul retired a couple years ago. If you ever see Terry Paul, he did this university millions and millions of dollars of justice, but from an environmental social governance perspective, he did the university tons and tons, and when I say tons, emissions and things that would be very impactful in the climate, the resiliency, and what we do. Thank Terry Paul for what he did, right? He was our energy engineer, and he established long-standing programs that will live well beyond myself and whoever follows me because of they were the right thing to do. They were the right thing to do in 2002. And they'll be the right thing to do in 2052 or 2043 when we're supposed to be carbon neutral as a university. Some may or may not know that. We do have a carbon neutral commitment here at the university. 2043 is the date that we've kind of committed to be carbon neutral. It's going to take a huge effort even from where we are now. We're about 16.3% carbon neutral in our consumption on the electrical side right now. 15% of that is from a wind component, and 1.3% is from the solar garden that Yumi mentioned here right on the south end of campus. But we've got a long way to go, right? And so there's lots of things that we need to do and we're looking into doing over the course of the next 20 years, right? 20 years might seem like a very long time, but in carbon neutrality and in what the current state of regulation and all of those things are within our, that they're being, and I almost can say inflicted on our power and our utility providers, it's a short amount of time. It's going to come fast, and there are lots of things within that time frame that have to happen, both at a university level and from our providers and our vendors that we get our capacity from. A week and a half ago, Brian Alexander was on campus, and he gave a really interesting discussion on how universities are really the mesh of climate change, or should be the mesh of climate change and climate resiliency, because we have obviously technology, we have educators, We have learners and researchers that are very curious and want to do better and want to do these things and put these initiatives into place. And so it was very, very interesting to see how, yeah, we're a liberal arts college, but he really feels that liberal arts is the driver of climate change, and his discussion about that was very, very interesting. And I know it's recorded in the archives that you should go out and listen to what he had to say. All of those things are what we are aiming to do, and we're doing it because we want to do that, not because we are being told to do that, right? We have great leadership, Provost Mealy, President Mantella, all the senior leaders, and many of you, obviously, that are here and are interested in this topic, and the panel. We're all doing the right thing, and we're doing it because it's right for Grand Valley, and it's right for the climate.
Thank you. Boy, you said it all. That's wonderful. Thank you. So really, this is our last prepared question, and then we will open it up to you, lovely audience. And so the last question is, what are some of the ways that Grand Valley State University engages our wider community on issues of climate resilience and resource stewardship? Yumi?
Thanks, Christine. We've spoken about quite a few already. So we have faculty doing community-based scholarship and research. We have classes that are working in the community. Someone mentioned the Climate Change Education Summits Network. We just had the annual summit last week, and I talked to a ton of people from the community who had chosen to attend that. So that was really lovely. I've also just joined something called the C4 in Grand Rapids. It's the Community Collaboration on Climate Change. And that's really been a great experience for me to kind of help to explore what it looks like to provide the education and the resources and the space for community members to come together to work toward climate resiliency. And of course, in my own office, we are trying to do as much as we can with the community through the Sustainable Ag Project. So we have New City Neighbors out there. We have a space for Indigenous students and community to come out there. And so I'm sure I'm just scratching the surface on some of these things, but I do think there's a vast amount of community work being done related to this. It's always really, personally, I find it very lovely when we can get students working in partnerships with communities, so that's always been very rewarding.
So from a facilities and a utility perspective side, we have great relationships with our utility providers out there in the general community, and they're always looking out for our best interest. Right, we are a large component for many of their operations, and we're a larger customer, obviously, with the size and the footprint that we have. But they're always looking for ways to help us, help ourselves in efficiencies, in programs that are renewable energy credits that get us down that carbon neutrality path. That all does sometimes come with a cost at this point in time, but they are all being mandated at this point in time to be carbon neutral themselves as a production facility, whether it be natural gas or an electrical provider. And so all of those things organically will get there, but it's a matter of all the little things that we can do with other community partners and all of us as community partners within ourselves, right, at Grand Valley, all these things that we can do to get there little by little, right? Because it's going to take every ounce of effort to be carbon neutral by 2043. I can assure you of that.
I truly think we are at a very critical juncture where universities like ours can take the initiative to really model what it is to be sustainably resilient. And you can right away see that, we all see obstacles to that in the real world. Policies are not, although we know what is right, they're not in place. But as a university, I think we have a unique opportunity where we can teach, we can research, we can practice. For example, technological issues, our engineering departments can be in the forefront of addressing some of those. And I think we can model that. And within that, I think our students who are, who are feeling the climate depression or whatever the terminology you mentioned, powerless, can feel empowered. Even as they learn, and then they can go out to the real world and make true changes. They can work in agencies like the EPA and so on, and have the right right, be able to do the right changes. It's my thinking.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, we have some time for your questions. Just a few moments for questions, if you would like. So if you would please, we have a microphone here. If you would use the microphone for your question and introduce yourself, please. The gentleman in the back.
Thank you very much for the panel, to all of the panelists. My name is Mark Shaw. I'm the Dean of the Brooks College of Interdisciplinary Studies. I want to ask each one of you, well, Christine too, if you could have one more position at the university, it doesn't have to be in your area, that would make a huge difference for the university, West Michigan, the world, climate resilience, or education, what would your position be? Go.
You start.
Mark knows my answer to this one. I would really advocate for an energy manager.
Second that.
I would get one on energy, on climate policy. That's where I think the real issue is. We just are not having the right policies. It's just poor governance.
I would look towards diversity, equity, inclusion at a high level because of if we're going to be serious about really approaching climate change, we also need to approach climate justice and environmental justice within a very serious way. So I think that would affect a lot of people.
I defer to the first three, but because I think those would be much more impactful, but in a real practical perspective, we really need a climatologist on campus if we're going to teach climate change properly.
I would second the energy engineer. I'd like to go back to my facilities day job.
Yes, I'll support the energy engineer as well as the answer. Thank you for that question. Wonderful. We have another question.
Thank you, Mary. So first of all, I wanted to say how happy I am that we are having this event today. So thank you very much, Provost Mary. Thank you, all panelists, for great insights. I have a couple of very open-ended questions for the panel. So one is theoretical, the other one is practical. So as far as the resilience is concerned, I personally am a little bit skeptical when we are extrapolating the lessons from nature to social and political and economic systems. And I think there is a reason why we see that the literature on climate adaptation planning has been really encouraging us to think more about transformation rather than resilience. I think it's very convenient to hang to the term of resilience in terms of preservation of existing systems. But if those are the systems that, first of all, caused climate change, it might be too little too late to think about preserving them. So I invite you all to think about how we can move from resilience to transformation as a university. My second question is more practical. We know that our communities around the world and in the United States have been working on climate action for the past 20 years and climate adaptation for the past 15 years. And many small cities now have climate action and climate adaptation plans. My own research has been primarily focusing on small cities, both in the US and in France. And we can learn a lot from our communities, including Grand Rapids. We at the university sometimes like to be very self-celebratory, and of course we do many great things, but lots of work remains to be done, and we know that our climate action plan needs to be renewed in the context of everything that we have discussed today. It is probably time to think about climate resilience and especially climate adaptation plan for the university. And usually those climate adaptation plans need to be based on thorough vulnerability assessments. So many of our communities are very thoughtful about addressing climate justice and vulnerability, and especially vulnerability of the most vulnerable groups. What do we need to do as a university to address the most vulnerable groups here on campus, including the most vulnerable students? This is just an invitation for the conversation and maybe, future conversations about action. I know that it's a very big question. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. That is a big question. Resilience and transformation, I think that's the ideal, right? That's what, if I had my magic, if I had my genie lamp, that certainly it would be about talking about transformation and transforming a lot of systems, right? It's not just, it's our economic system is one of the things that has gotten in this mess, right? Is this reliance on fossil fuel usage, and then, of course, the implications of that are externalities in our system. I mean, the cost of products does not have any of this, in it. And so this is, I think, a really challenging issue, but, walking around in the United States and talking about changing capitalism is not gonna make you very popular, even if it is what needs to be done, right? So I think one of the real challenges is, it's a much bigger question than just at Grand Valley. It's more of a soul-searching question that I think we need to take on as a nation and as a world in terms of, what do we need to change about our lifestyles, and how does that happen? And how does that happen in a way that creates a more just space for everybody, and not just the super wealthy who are going to be just fine, right? They're going to be just fine. It's everybody else that's going to be really suffering, or could potentially be suffering if we don't make drastic changes. So how do those drastic changes happen? I wish I knew the answer to that, because then I would be in charge, right? I'd be in charge of, I don't know, the UN or something. I certainly have my views on the things that need to change, but I think that one of the biggest issues is that here in the United States, and this is going to be my very personal opinion, is that our leadership at the congressional, legislative level, they're just not taking it seriously. There's so many other interests that get involved, and so people who are really trying to make massive changes in this area are waylaid by corporate interests, by the oil interests, and so on and so forth, who are so incredibly wealthy and powerful. And so there may be a lot of common sense, things that we need to be doing, but our political system and how climate change has become politicized, I think is really working against moving from resilience to transformation. So right now I feel like I personally am desperate for resilience, but what I'd really love to see is major changes that would lead towards transformation. But those major changes requires everybody to get on board, right? Everybody, every household, every field of work, everybody. And so, I think that we need to be having much bigger and more sophisticated national conversations around this, and then also working towards, really bridging the divides that we have created, divisions that we have created in society, right? It is so hard to sit down. You go, I think we all have experienced. You go home for Thanksgiving or whatever holiday, and you just don't know how those conversations might devolve into, crazy uncle so and so, and and you're just well, I study this every day, and I'm telling you, I don't know how to compete with this, and it becomes, and that's actually one thing that we work on in my class is how do you talk to your family members who don't believe in climate change? How do you actually have conversations with people, and how can we work towards having logical, good conversations around this, despite the fact that the truth is it is going to change the way that our lives are led, right? But how, putting that into action, I think, is people that make a lot more money than I do. In terms of GVSU, one of the things that I say is we need to feed our students. We need to start with the basic, right? We have a food security issue on campus. I mean, I have had students come to me needing help with food, and that is a basic. You can't learn if you're hungry, right? You can't learn if you don't get rest. If you have to have the basic needs met. Right now, I feel like a lot of our students don't have those very basic needs met. Now we are trying. We have the pantry. We have other things that people I think are making efforts towards it. But I went to the pantry, and I'd like to see it be as big as this room, not the tiny little closet that it's in. I want my food insecure students to have access to nutritious and healthy food that is culturally appropriate for them as well, right? And it also doesn't have to be something that can live on a shelf until the apocalypse comes, right? Real healthy, nutritious foods. And so, I think that having a big plan and ideal for a climate action plan is incredibly important. But if we're going to really make an impact on our students in the community, we also have to put those most basic things into place. And from there, when we don't have students that are hungry, and we don't have students that have these very basic fundamental needs, then we can have these bigger conversations about how do we then take these students and create, turn them into the community in a way that they can then go into other communities and make them food secure, and kind of have those systems spread out. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's an impossible question to answer truly, but that was a fumbling stab at it.
You have raised so many questions, it's impossible to answer them all. I think the questions are in themselves important. Even to start thinking, in no time in our history has it so much of an opportune time to really tangle with this issue. I think we really need, not just IPCCs, an organization with some teeth to get going, because right now we see the global south has no teeth in this game. They only are going to see the consequences of continuing climate change. We are the causes of most of it. So there has to be this justice element from the students you're talking about, food insecurity, all the way to the global south and so on. Those are definitely complex issues, but they all can be handled, I think. But we have to come together on this. But we cannot, ages ago, 60, 70 years ago, Gareth Harding wrote a book called Tragedy of the Commons. In that, air, water, and soil were the tragedy because we're going to be divided as nations, and each nation is going to exploit these commons, what are really global commons. Because if you do not, somebody else will. So the ones who got first at it, at doing the best job of exploiting their resources, are now today the top dogs. But others want to be there too. So there's all this, and that will mean more carbon emissions and so on. So it is very, very complicated. But it's all doable. Nature itself doesn't have any problems. It'll roll along for a few more billion years with whatever comes. It is when we mix us into the picture with our variables, then we have these issues. But those are real issues for us, and we have to tackle. That's what a university is, to ask the really big, almost unanswerable questions. And I think we're at least getting it started.
I just add, taking leadership, talking about it is a huge step. In my environmental science course, again, I do that it's always economically better to do the environmentally right thing if you look at long-term versus short-term, society versus individual. And then there's a huge cost of the status quo, too. So there's three huge impediments. But if you talk openly and honestly, it's almost always, and it's become politically correct to be sustainable. Everyone's for renewable energy, whether you believe in climate change or not, it's irrelevant. There's, people with shotguns shooting whatever that have a little solar panel that, for their hunting shack. So, you go with what works for most people.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I think we will stop the questions right there, but I have to say that my quick back-of-the-envelope calculation, given the number of faculty and staff who have scholarly expertise and who teach on these topics, if we wanted to capture in additional panels and additional quest series all of the actions and expertise that is taking place on campus related to climate, we could have a quest series every single week from now until the end of 2024. So we have lots more to talk about and lots more expertise to share, but I'm so grateful for this conversation. Some of the other terminologies, some of the things that I learned today that I'll be thinking about beyond the answers from our panelists, they include functional redundancy, sustainable resilience, regenerative agriculture, spheres of influence, empowerment through involvement and action, 2043. The University as Mesh and Transformation. Thank you all so much. Provost Smiley.
Should we thank them one more time? So Christine invited everybody to introduce themselves. I don't know that you have introduced yourself and that you have introduced the group that you're leading on sustainability.
Hi, Christine Renner, Vice Provost for Instructional Development and Innovation and Director of the Robert and Mary Pugh Faculty Teaching and Learning Center. And part of my responsibilities up here this morning also are to represent a wonderful group of faculty and staff that's the Climate Resilience Working Group. So these are folks who are interested in teaching, scholarship, service, community engagement, and also collaboration across disciplines to really further the things that we're talking about here and help address some of these larger questions that have been raised.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you again for the work that you have done. It's amazing. It's such a complex problem. And I really appreciate the balance between bringing that complexity, the sense of urgency, the humility, but also the optimism and the fact that, yes, we are a higher education institution. Because it's a complex problem, it's ours to take. We have a agency on it, and we have a responsibility on it. So thank you again, and I agree this is, I think Bopi said it, you said that this is the beginning. The questions in themselves are important, and putting them out there is extremely important, and this is really a call for continuing that conversation. Personally, I feel very proud to be in an institution where we have so many places where we are addressing this problem. And I also believe that we can do more, that we should do more, and I know we have the will, at least internally, to do that. So I really look forward to seeing that across all the colleges. I know I was wondering, so we have Brooks represented, we have class represented, but I know the work goes way beyond that. I know we have many more departments who are working on this. I know we have pretty much every college who is also, that have representatives in this group. So thank you again, very important topic, great contributions.